Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, the 10th of May, I earlier posted a video, but it didn't work out. There was some kind of technical issue, so I apologize, and I'm doing it again. And the topic of today's presentations is Putin, or specifically what he will do, or to what extent one can expect the peace that, as he put it, is coming soon. So these are the issues we'll discuss today, but I'd like to start with the overall tone of the assessment of the situation in Russia in Western media lately. And this was primarily very negative. The Financial Times published an article describing turbulence in Russia and that there were economic issues in Russia, and just the entire Western press was talking about almost an economic crisis in Russia, and that Putin would be overthrown soon, and that there was going to be a revolution, and that Ukrainian drones are devastating Russian economy and Russian capacity to produce oil and export oil. And it just goes on and on and on. So to what extent these themes are true, and to what extent Putin addressed those in his speech? This is what we're going to talk today. Now, it is true that there is discontent in Russia. And the most of the discontent is actually about the go slow approach. In many discussions that I listen to regularly, there is discontent that the war is lasting already 4 years into the fifth, and we're still in Donbass, and there is still a lot to go. The public criticism of the go slow Putin's approach has been on the increase. However, it would be totally wrong to suggest, as some of the commentators have, that this is a somehow favoring Ukraine. It's exactly the other way around. The more the Ukrainians hit with their drones manufactured in the West, the more they hit the interior of Russia, the more voices speak about not just a deal, not just peace immediately, but total destruction of the Zelensky regime. This is the predominant mood in the country. Moreover, if by some chance Putin were to be killed, the replacement that would come would be just like in Iran, much more anti-Western, and would act in a much more decisive way than Putin has been up to now. Now, what has caused a lot of discussion lately was that a few days ago there was a meeting of the Общественная палата, societal organization, where the former retired former chief of the general staff of the Russian army, Yuri Baluyevsky, made a sensational announcement. And in his speech, his words that were repeated over and over were, "When are we going to start fighting for real? How many red lines we will allow Ukrainians to cross, and the West? How long are we going to allow the West to produce the drones to hit Russian strategic assets without hitting them back?" So these were very serious issues. And what's interesting is that the journalists in the press conference yesterday that Putin gave raised exactly those issues, and Putin provided his answers. And this is why this is so interesting to follow. Now, the answers to the question why the offensive is so slow, according to various assessments before I turn to Putin himself, by the generals and by the commentators, are primarily that it is a political decision. In other words, many of these generals keep repeating that Russia has all the necessary tools in order to bring the war to conclusion quickly by a decisive action, and that the only reason this action has not been taken is the political decision, which means President Putin. Now, what they were proposing, and it would be interesting to see if Putin's road to peace, as he described it yesterday, would involve those methods. But if you listen to the Russian generals and what they propose, they say that there are many areas that Russia could act upon without directly destroying the production facilities of the drones that the Ukrainians use in order to hit Russian oil installations and other strategic assets. So among those measures, they name that what needs to be done is a total blockade of the Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea. That could be done very easily by just an announcement that any vessel that would not have a Russian permission to cross will be destroyed. And that could be done very, very easily by just one submarine that would be patrolling the areas in the Black Sea. For example, the next thing that is publicly recommended is to blow up the bridges and the all the crossings from Ukraine to Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, the bordering countries, so that nothing comes into Ukraine. And if the convoys are discovered, when they can be discovered from the air, that they be destroyed immediately. Even if they are on the Polish side of the border. And then the level of escalation goes higher, including hitting the drones that are flying over Latvia and Estonia and Finland into Russia. Up until yesterday, it was all hypothetical. Nobody knew for sure that the airspace of these countries was being used by the Ukrainians. But yesterday, a Ukrainian drone was shot over Latvia, and now it is now there is proof. There's no doubt that Ukrainian drones are flying over Latvia and presumably over Lithuania, because you can't get to Latvia without crossing Lithuania first. And you can't get to Ust-Laga port without flying over Estonia. So this is the smoking gun. Now there is proof. And from strictly international law point of view, Russia has a right now to intercept those drones over Latvian or Estonian or Lithuanian territory. And this is exactly what the generals have recommended. So in other words, let me turn now to Putin and his answers. But what's important here is that the mood in the country has become tougher. People are indeed demanding fast action to end the war. And this is exactly what Putin has addressed in his press conference. So the most amazing thing is that he used the words, and I translate, "Дело идет к завершению," which can be translated as "the thing is coming to an end," or to a conclusion, or to a resolution. So these are the various ways of translating it. Now, this was in response to various questions about the drones and about the Western manufacturers. And indeed, Putin said that the entire NATO is supporting the war effort exactly as the entire Europe supported Hitler's armies in the onslaught on the Soviet Union. And he said this war was ended in victory, and this one will end in victory too. And he said it very energetically, kind of reassuring those who doubted that Russia will achieve victory. But the important thing is to know what is meant by victory. And he also explained somewhat what is in mind. Now, it is totally clear from his comments that victory means without Zelensky, that the Zelensky regime will have to go. This is something that he didn't specifically say, but this is my interpretation of the tone of his remarks. Moreover, he had very warm words to say about President Trump, specifically because it was Trump that communicated to Zelensky, presumably through Umerov, who was a former defense minister and very closely associated with Zelensky, to communicate it back to Zelensky not to shoot at the Red Square, which presumably Zelensky wanted to do. And that is when Putin gave a warning, which was ignored by the Europeans, but not ignored by President Trump. And that is why he was thanked so much by Putin, a warning that if Ukrainians hit the Red Square parade, then the Russians would respond with massive attack on Kiev and on Zelensky personally, and what was named places where decisions are made. So the correspondent, another one, asked a question that referring to Putin's proposal to have 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers buffer zone, so that the people in the provinces bordering Ukraine live quieter lives, because now they're subjected to daily attacks by drones and missiles made in Britain, by the way. So to that question, this is how it went. She said, will we have a border zone of security zone of 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, or all the way to the Ukrainian borders? And Putin said, yes, you just answered the question, which means the security zone will be all the way to the Ukrainian borders. And then he specified, we do not want any threats to Russian territory coming ever from Ukraine. Now, I interpreted it to mean that he is still not ruling out an agreement. He does not want to occupy all of Ukraine, which is possible. But I think his solution is to have a treaty, and he repeated that again, a treaty needs to be signed. Given the fact that he was speaking so warmly about Trump and his contribution to keeping a ceasefire during the Victory Day, it seems to me that there was some understanding, and I mentioned it many times before, and this is a reaffirmation that is most likely that there is an understanding between Trump and Putin over how to end the Ukraine war. And it's probably comes the closest to the Russian original demands, which is demilitarization and denazification, which means no regime of Zelensky, and limitations on the military assortment of weapons and the armed forces of Ukraine. So the agreement is still possible. Then, of course, came up the question, what about the Europeans? What about all these companies that produces drones and that say that Russia is going to fight the war with Europe? Putin reiterated many times that Russia has no intention whatsoever to attack Europe, and that again, when he was asked what is the future of relations with Europe, he again repeated what I always say all the time, the way I read his mind, is that he wants good relations with Europe. And he hopes that the new leaders would come to power in Europe who would hear his plea and respond to restoring normal relations. And then responding to Costa, the European Commission person, initiative to start negotiating with Putin, the journalist asked him who he would prefer to represent European Union in negotiations. And he said, well, if you ask me, my personal preference is that would be Gerhard Schröder, the former Chancellor of Germany, and as a personal friend of Putin. There are wonderful pictures of them together in the year 2000, 2001, when he was Chancellor. So but then he also added that he would not negotiate with those who were saying bad things about Russia. This presumably means Kaja Kallas and some other European leaders. So this is all quite interesting because what it implies is that the contours of the deal may be seen in this interview one more time. And I would put it like this, that Putin is ready to sign a peace treaty. It has to be a treaty, no ceasefires. And in that treaty, the key Russian conditions are no military threat from Ukraine ever again against Russia. For that, you need European participation. And it will not be just between US, Ukraine, and Russia. Ukraine will have to have a legitimate government, not Zelensky, whose term expired 2 years ago. So this would be a neutral Ukraine with no sizable armed forces. And the other Russian conditions on the church, on the language, on the minority rights. But what's new now is that because of the voices in Europe that it has to be included and it's better to reopen a dialogue with Russia, now it seems to be an opening, a kind of a window of opportunity to get the Europeans on board in negotiating the terms of this peace treaty. Now, what's most important now is what action Putin would follow. It's obvious to me that he prefers a treaty, that he prefers to finish the war now on the terms that Russia reiterated many times before. But if it does not happen, what is likely that Putin would have to intensify military action fast, as the generals describe, and finish the war by military means. And we are here to see what course will take place, which depends, of course, not only on Putin, but also partly on Zelensky, on Trump, and on the Europeans. So this is where we are right now at this historical point where you could go one way or the other way, and we will see which way it will go. Well, thank you very much, and I invite you to, when you have time, look at my other playlists. There is a playlist on the European history, AP European history, with coverage of entire European history from Renaissance to World War II, and a playlist on Ukraine war, and Russia under the Bolshevik regime, and Russian history and Soviet history. So just make your pick and write your comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you very soon with another edition of Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin.